Hi, I am Kevin Smith, Master Butcher of Beast and Cleaver, and today I'm going to show you how to carve steaks to make them taste as good as possible. When we are thinking about steak, there's three main things we want to be looking at: how the animal is raised, how it's cooked, and then finally how you eat it on a plate. There's not a right way or a wrong way, but there are certainly things you can do to make the experience a lot better. So I'm going to go over these three classic, iconic trophy cut steaks over here: the bone-in ribeye, the tenderloin, and the king of steak, the porterhouse. And I'm going to show you how I, as a butcher, cut these steaks to make them eat at their best. We're going to start with the most simple steak of the three, the tenderloin, the filet mignon, the fillet, whatever you choose to call it. It is a very, very tender steak, the most tender steak on the entire animal. The grain structure on this guy is running this way. So what I like to do is to cut the steak in half and then cut it into pieces going against the grain. If we choose to stand it up, you could cut it this way, but to do that you're going to need a very sharp knife, and these are not the knives that you get when you're in a steakhouse. So for me, the simplest way is to cut this piece in half. Then it allows me to cut against the grain rather than having to cut really long pieces going this way to maximize the tenderness. So the steak, I'm going to cut this straight down the middle here, and we can see really well cooked steak, beautifully cooked here. And now for me, I want to now cut this way. So if it's this way, it's not going to taste bad by any means, but to maximize the tenderness of the tenderloin, you want to be cutting it against the grain. And we know that the grain is running this way. Not every place you're going to go to is going to slice the steak for you, and this is how a lot of steaks are going to show up on the plate when you get them. There's no right or wrong way to do it, but if you're trying to maximize tenderness, this is how I would choose to do it. The grain is running this way, so I want to cut this way. When we get into some of the more steaks with more muscles on it, you'll see the difference that it really makes. So I'm not trying to make this look fancy for Instagram. This is just how to make the steak taste the most tender it possibly can. It's about as easy as that. So next up is the porterhouse. We have two main muscles on here. We've got the tenderloin, and on the other side here, we've got the beautiful New York strip. Lovely golden fat cap on here. This one is about 2 inches thick, which is perfect for a porterhouse. I've got it standing up so I can show you exactly where the bones are in here. They run directly down the middle on this side, coming down here onto the tenderloin side, and you've got the classic New York strip running on this side. So a lot of steakhouses are going to take this off the bone for you. Some of them won't. So if you do end up getting one in a steakhouse that looks like this, which is great, this is how I would want to get it. I would start by taking the tenderloin off down here and then following the bone all the way down here, laying it down and slicing the New York strip against the grain, and then the same as we did with the other tenderloin against the grain on that side. I'm going to lay it down to cut it. I just wanted to get some anatomy going on here so you can see where we're at. Looking at this steak laying down, we can see we have our New York strip, which runs right down here. And then there's a little bone that carves down here. This is part of the spine, the chine, and it comes around and down here. And then on the other side of that bone here, we have our big tenderloin, big tenderloin over here. Best thing to do is to take it off the bone, otherwise you're going to be like getting stuck cutting into the bone. So I like to take the tenderloin off first, follow it down, coming down. You're letting the knife hit the bone, follow it down. There we have our big tenderloin, and what we can see here is, which is great, is there's this big chunk of fat on there. That's amazing. That's going to add to the flavor, and really important when you're cooking a porterhouse to have some protection from the fat. You want as much fat on the tenderloin to keep it as tender and juicy as you can. So we've got this guy off. We'll come back to that in a sec. Now I know the bone is here, so I want to take my knife and just guide it down straight along here, all the way to the end. and spin and follow. This doesn't go in a straight line, it goes down and it kind of curves around here. So now it makes a little bit more sense. You can see what you're looking at. Your classic New York strip and your tenderloin, filet mignon. Then you've got your bone here. It's always going to be a little bit of meat on the bone. That's great. Pick it up, chew on it. It's the best part in my opinion. So we'll go into how we carve this now. On the tenderloin, you do get this little extra piece of muscle on here, which is really, really flavorful. Really got lots of sinew running through it. So it's got a tiny bit of chew. So you want to take this guy, cut it. Amazing little piece of meat there.
If you don't mind, Kevin.
Let's go back into the tenderloin over here, looking at it, knowing that the grain structures are running this way here. We've got our big chunk of suet on here, the fat, protecting it. I want to take that off, and definitely don't throw that away. That is a golden piece, that's a golden bite. It's almost like bone marrow, that. So now again, I want to cut this in half. Again, there's not a right way or a wrong way, but this is how to make it eat the best possible way. So now that we've got it in half here, cut it into smaller, more manageable pieces. Going against the grain as much as we can. And you know, if you're out in a steakhouse and you've ordered this for yourself and you're like, oh, I'm not going to be able to eat all this, maybe don't carve up the whole thing. So I'm going to leave part of the tenderloin over here. I'm going to cut the rest of this. This is so tender over here. So then, you know, lay it out, fan it out a little bit so you can see what you got coming in here. Then we got our New York strip over here. Again, amazing thing about the New York strip is it's actually part of the longissimus muscle, which starts all the way up in the neck of the animal, runs all the way down into the back leg almost. It's essentially the same muscle that is found on a ribeye, only the cap, the spinalis, is not on this. It becomes covered in this beautiful fat cap on the back. So the New York strip is essentially the same as a ribeye minus the cap. So there's not a right way or wrong way to do this. But for me, I want to be getting a piece of fat on every bite. So again, thinking that I might not eat the entire thing, I'm going to cut it in half. And you can see the grain is running this way. So ideally, you'd be cutting it this way, but it just doesn't make sense to do that regardless of where you are. But I am going to go today and cut this guy nice and thin, making sure that each bite that I'm going to get has got a piece of that caramelized fat on the end over here. If you have a super sharp knife and you're at home, slice it thinner. But again, eating with a steak knife, there's only so thin you can get, and I think this is absolutely perfect here. Getting down to the end, there's going to be a bit of sinew on here. I am not opposed to that. It's a chew. I'm all about chew. Everything doesn't have to be soft. So you're looking at this here now. You've got your big chunk over here. You've got your nice chewy pieces up here. And look at this fat over here. This is like bone marrow, okay? It's been slow roasted in the oven, so you want to get into this. Think of this as bone marrow. Everyone talks about bone marrow. You don't really hear too much about suet. Suet is gold as well. So that there. You've got that there. If you wanted to get really specific, you can look at the fat here on the outside, and there's a tiny piece of sinew down there. If you're being really, really specific, you can cut the fat off and lose that tiny piece of sinew. But again, that's not how I would choose to eat a steak. You're losing some of the chew. And the best bite for me is taking the suet, putting it on top of a piece, and that to me is the golden bite of a porterhouse right there. And that's about how much I would go into cutting and carving this lovely porterhouse. All right, the ribeye, the main steak that pretty much everyone chooses, the #1 selling steak by far, and for a good reason. This one here is probably coming from ribs about 5 or 6. The reason I can tell that is it has this huge spinalis muscle on the outside, the rib cap, which everybody loves. You got a smaller longissimus muscle, which is the eye of the ribeye. And down here, which you can't really see at the moment, is another really, really tender little muscle called the complexus, all attached by the bone, which has got the intercostal meat going on it. And then you've got this lovely little fatty chunk of like meat up here too. So this just comes down here, our bone. You can see there's a big fat cap in here and just over here. That's the natural separation of the muscles, and it's going to always be on this part of the ribeye coming from ribs 5 to 8. Starts to get smaller after that. For me, I like to take the bone off because I like to chew on it, and then I want to take the cap off and I want to cut the cap going against the grain. I want to take out this lovely muscle here, the longissimus, slice it, complexus, and then take this lovely fat and don't waste it, put it on top of the meat and eat it. I'm going to cut this into 5 different parts here. We're going to have our complexus, small tender little muscle, the longissimus, the center, the eye of the ribeye, the cap, one of the most marbled cuts, and then the intercostal meat in the rib, and then we've got some little fat chunks as well. So you're getting almost 5 or 6 different cuts coming off of this lovely little steak here. Going in, taking the rib, following it down. Essentially this rib here, if it was pork, would be a baby back rib. So anytime you're getting a bone-in ribeye, you're getting a baby back beef rib. Up here next to the rib, we've got this lovely fat chunk. I'm going to take that off first. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm trying to get to the eye muscle here. I don't just want to be hacking it up. I'm trying to be a little bit more careful on how I'm getting to it. This is going to have a lot of chew to it, all different textures. There's fat. Again, it all adds to the flavor. So just slice this up. A lot of people won't want to be chewing on this too much. Personally, I think these are the best parts of the animal. They've got so much more character. And when I'm cutting these sort of pieces, I'm trying to get a decent ratio of fat and meat on the same bite. So you can see slightly textured, chewy, fatty piece up here. Going to be living right next to this beautiful rib over here. Now I can get in and I can start taking off if you see, I can just pull this apart here. So you can just cut it like this, but again, for tenderness and eating it best, follow the muscles, separate the muscles, they just fall apart. Coming in, I'm going to take out the eye now because that's what's coming off easiest. So just taking the eye muscle out. I'm going to leave that, I'm not going to carve it yet. Then I'm going to take this muscle down here, small tender muscle, the complexus, just pop it out, super good. If you look at this, it's very similar in texture to a tenderloin. Really, really amazing little steak. Then in here we got the cap, which is this big, fat, juicy muscle. And on this side you can see that fat I was talking about there, which is the natural separation from the longissimus to the spinalis. So take the fat out. Think of it again as bone marrow. Don't think of it as chewy fat you don't want to eat. It's delicious. Now we got our longissimus and our complexus. So we got the 4 main pieces, the rib, the spinalis, the cap, the longissimus, and the complexus. We're going to go ahead and just slice this up now. It's not going to taste bad whatever you do. It's essentially like the most tender cuts on the animal up here. So, you know, these are all like 9 out of 10 tenderness. Almost getting a little bit too technical and taking away from the beauty of eating this amazing steak here. Just to make your bite a little bit more tender, go against the grain. This is going to eat similar to a tenderloin, but it's going to have a lot more flavor. There's our complexus. We got the longissimus muscle, which is essentially the New York strip. So once you've taken all these muscles out, you're left with the longissimus. So we'll cut this one. The grain structure, you can see it running this way. So cut against the grain, as always. So the grain structure's running this way. Again, thinking about making the most tender bite, going against the grain the best we can. This is a circular cut, so it's pretty much impossible to get against the grain on every cut. Yeah, so again, it's a cylindrical muscle, the longissimus, that starts at a size of about this in the second rib. At its biggest, it gets to about this big in the New York strip, and then it tapers down and becomes really small and goes into the sirloin at the end of the animal. So this is about 3 inches of the longissimus muscle, the center of the ribeye, the eye of the ribeye. I'll come back now to this beautiful cut over here, which is essentially the baby back beef rib is a great way to think of this. We've got so much chew, so much texture, and usually at the restaurant when we cook the ribeye, this is everyone's favorite bite. We have next to it this lovely piece of fat, which is, again, when I'm eating these and when we're doing them at a restaurant, we don't tell people it's fat. We tell them to reference it in their mind as bone marrow, because it's essentially the same sort of texture once you get into it. That's what you get when you eat a ribeye. You got to eat all of it. So yeah, again, it's a golden bite right there. There is no right or wrong way how to carve your steak, but there is definitely ways to make it a little bit more tender, and this is the way to do it.
Subscribe to our channel and visit ChefSteps.com for more tips, recipes, guides, and tools to help you level up in the kitchen.